And we are back for another episode of TPS, the Productivity Show, the #1 podcast on iTunes when it comes to time management and productivity. My name is Tan. I'm the founder and CEO of Agent Efficiency. And today with me, I have my co-host, Brooks Duncan. How are you today?
I'm great. How are you? I just
I
found out
just finished working out.
I just got a summons for jury duty. So I'm very excited about that. The prospect of going to jury duty during COVID sounds like a lot of fun. So I'm really looking forward to that in January.
You can do social distance jury duty. That
We'll
sounds
find
very
out.
one of a kind opportunity. So even though I think you are dreading the experience, I think it would be a really interesting experience because you can then, when you're old, like a little grandpa, talk about, back in the day when you did jury duty, social distance, that was a whole different ball game. But we're not here to talk about jury duty. We're here to help people free up more time because today's episode is all about personal outsourcing. It's the idea that you can win back at least 5 hours a week, if not more, by delegating and outsourcing some of the work that you do in your day-to-day living. And that applies both to work and your personal life. So if you're someone who's strapped for time, you're going to really enjoy today's episode. But before we start diving into today's content, we want to make sure that you're in the right place. So you're listening to TPS, the Productivity Show, the #1 podcast on iTunes when it comes to time management and productivity, where we help people become more productive at work and in life. And we always like to start off with our top 3 favorite resources. And Brooks, I know we have 3 of them here today. Would you mind sharing in 90 seconds or less what they are?
Yeah, so we thought we'd better include for our #1 top 3 resource is the book that introduced many, many people, myself included, to this concept of how it's possible for almost anybody to do personal outsourcing. And that is the book called The 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss. I learned a lot from this book. There's a lot in it that I know maybe turns some people off. The recommendation I would say is ignore what you don't like and just focus on the possibilities that it opens up. Chances are after reading it, you're not just going to work 4 hours, but it's still a great book for learning some of the mentality around outsourcing and freeing up time and leveraging time. That's #1. #2 is Timular. So this is an 8-sided dice that sits on your desk. And one of the problems with time tracking is that it can be a pain in the butt to actually do. It can be very fiddly. You have to go into a tool and start and stop things, that sort of thing. Timular is like this big die that sits on your desk, and you can just assign different sides to different activities. And when you want to start, say, tracking your time, when you're doing email or something like that, you just flip it to the email side, and then it will automatically start tracking your time in email. Yoke and Alice in our dojo both recommend the Timular, and Alice in the live recording, we record these episodes live with our dojo audience and our TPS Plus members. Alice actually said she just flipped her Timular right as I said that to track the time she's spending listening to podcasts. The third thing is another device that is popular with a number of our readers and podcast listeners, and that is the Essington glass. So if you are somebody who is really into Pomodoro timing, so focusing on a work task for, say, 25 minutes or something like that, there's lots of different apps you can use with that. You can use a regular old any timer, really. However, if you want to go really big, it's this beautiful hourglass filled with sand that you can have on your desk. It's big, and when you're ready to start tracking you're ready to start your focus block, you turn the Essington glass over, and it will run through. So that's a nice tactical way to do your Pomodoro timing.
And it makes for an awesome gift. So if you have someone in your life that is obsessed with time management and productivity, I would highly recommend that as a gift. So we'll have links to everything that we just talked about in the show notes. So if you're listening to us, you can go to theproductivityshow.com/333 to find the show notes. Or if you're listening to us in an app, just swipe and you'll see the links in there as well. So let's talk about personal outsourcing today. What is this topic all about and what we're going to be covering today? So for those who find themselves with tasks that have to be done and they want to start outsourcing it to someone, but they're not sure how to do it, this episode is going to be great for you. We're going to share some tips to help you get started with this. And if you've heard about outsourcing and you maybe even tried it before, but kind of didn't make it work for you, we're going to share some tips and strategies for you here today as well to make sure that it is going to be successful going forward. And if you're already outsourcing parts of your life and you want to take it up even further or get more ideas and inspiration for all the things you could be outsourcing, I think you're going to be really enjoying this episode, as well as we're going to share some of the personal things that we outsource in our lives that go beyond just the basics. So we actually have a live training coming up on this very topic. If you are a dojo member, every month we do a live workshop called Do the Damn Thing. So this is where we will do very little teaching, but actually have you implement most of the information. So it's all about the idea of like less information, more implementation. And that's what we call Do the Damn Thing, DTDT as we like to call it. And it's going to be on personal outsourcing. And it's going to be taking place on January 12th, 2021. So if that is something you want to participate in, then you can go to theproductivityshow.com/implement. Again, that URL is theproductivityshow.com/implement. If you're already a Dojo member, you should be seeing reminder emails to join us live. And if you're not a Dojo member yet, just go to that link, theproductivityshow.com/implement, and join us there. Okay. I want to give a special shout out for those who are TPS Plus subscribers. Thank you so much for subscribing to us and listening to an upgraded version of TPS Plus. And if you're interested in checking that out, we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But in the meantime, you can always go to theproductivityshow.com/plus. All right, Brooks, let's talk about personal outsourcing here. And I know you and I, we've talked a lot about the T framework, which stands for time, energy, and attention. It's kind of like our productivity methodology here at Asian Efficiency. And we like to think of it as like 3 different currencies that you can master. And if you master all 3 currencies, time, energy, and attention, you are going to be a really Asian efficient person. Now, many of you who are listening might be short on time, right? You might not have a lot of time in your life. And if that is you, then today's episode is going to be really valuable to you, because I know many of you who are first discovering the Productivity Show, who are first discovering Asian Efficiency, come with the challenge of like, hey, I want to do so many great things in my life, but I don't have the time to do it. If that is you, then you definitely want to pay attention to personal outsourcing, okay? So if you want to dive deeper into like the time currency of the T framework, we definitely recommend that you check out TPS 219. So if you go to theproductivityshow.com/219, we'll dive deeper into that topic in that episode. But today's topic, personal outsourcing, is really about the idea of how can you, quote unquote, outsource or delegate tasks that you have going on in your life so that someone else can do it for you for cheaper, so that you can win back multiple hours a week. And it sounds radical, but you can actually get a lot of things done in less time when you have other people helping you. Imagine having an extra set of hands or an extra brain helping you get stuff done. Like, how much more would you be able to accomplish, right? Like, I know you and I, Brooks, when we're doing this podcast together, we can get so much more done when we're collaborating and working on stuff together. Or even when I tell you, hey, Brooks, could you do this for me? And you tell me, hey, Tan, could you do this for me? We can always like create more value and free time for each other that way. And so that's why I'm so excited about today's episode. But Brooks, for those who are like kind of new to personal outsourcing, can you kind of explain some of the benefits that come with this?
Yeah, well, I'm glad you mentioned the T framework, because personal outsourcing is something that can actually nail all 3. You can free up more time, you can take away energy sucking things that allow you to have more energy for the things that matter, and it can help focus your attention because you're getting rid of things that maybe you should not be spending your time on and focusing. So it's like a win-win-win when it comes to the T framework. And outsourcing really does have the potential to increase your efficiency, but also your effectiveness and your quality. This is something we've talked about in previous podcasts about efficiency and effectiveness. And if you get it right, which is we're going to talk about today, is some of the ways you can get it right. It can really increase both efficiency and effectiveness. I'm actually really glad that we're talking about this, and I'm really excited about this episode talking about it with you, Tam, because you are like the master of outsourcing. Like, sometimes you outsource things that it didn't even occur to me that people would get others to do, but it's not in the the reason for being lazy or something like that. It's that you know the value of your time and you know how to focus your time. So you're just like, well, this is not this activity that I'm doing, whether it's like getting Amazon packages or whether it's, doing all the different stuff, stocking your fridge and that sort of stuff. It's all in the service of being able to focus on the things that matter to you. But this actually raises a question that I'm interested to hear your take on it, which is, I just said, you kind of know the value of your time, et cetera, et cetera. One of the challenges that many of us have with the concept of outsourcing, and this is something I personally have struggled with a lot, is, if I can do something myself and it's not that hard to do, and sometimes I might even enjoy doing it sometimes, it's so hard to justify spending money on it, especially if it's something, maybe I have a new business or something like that, or I'm new in a role. Like, how do you make that justification to yourself for actually spending the money especially when we're all kind of like tightening up on expenses lately?
Yeah, I think that's one of the things where you have to really consider what your time is worth. And people talk about this on like a philosophical level very often, but then put it into practical use at like ground zero, which means basically nothing at all. And so I think it's a little easier to do this if your income level has no ceiling, right? So if you're a business owner, you're a contractor or a freelancer, you typically have the possibility to earn more income, and therefore there's no ceiling associated with that. So it's easier almost to yourself to justify something like that. Whereas if you have a 9 to 5 or you have a job that has consistent income, sometimes the idea of just spending an extra, let's say $100, $200, or $300 on something doesn't result into, let's say, more money, but could result into more time, which then you have to ask yourself, is it worth my time or worth the money to spend an extra $300 to get X, Y, and Z benefit, right? And so if you're someone who is listening to this right now and you're like you're in that bracket where your income ceiling is kind of limited or it's kind of stagnant, you really have to think about like, what are the benefits of outsourcing certain things? And we're definitely going to dive deeper into that today. But imagine having, let's just say you spend an extra $200 a month to get 5 hours back in a month. Okay. Like, just think about that for a moment. Like, you're going to give someone $200 in a month and you get 5 hours back. Is that worth it to you? What could you do with those 5 hours? Because that is really what determines if the money is worth spending, right? So imagine if someone was doing like the cleaning in your home, the laundry, the grocery shopping, picking up packages, running errands for you, and it costs you $200 a month. But that way you didn't have all the stress, the headaches. You could spend more time picking up, your kids from school, doing, playtime activities with them, reading with them, going to the library, spending more time with your significant other, maybe more time with your family. Like, is that worth $200 a month? And for some of you, that is a resounding yes, that is totally worth it. And for some of you, you might say, well, I'm not sure if that's worth it or not. And if you're not sure, hopefully by the end of the episode, you start to realize your time is actually worth a lot more, because time is really the only non-renewable resource that we have, right? We cannot get more time, really. Time goes by whether we do something or not. We can always make more money, right? And energy kind of like fades over time as we get older, right? Many of us who, especially once we get beyond the age of 37, there have been several studies that show that we become more aware of our mortality. Anywhere between 35 and 38 is usually when that happens. And we start to realize, actually, we don't have a lot of time, first and foremost. And as I get older, my body starts to break down. I don't have the energy necessarily to do all the things I want to do. And so the beautiful thing, though, is as we get older, oftentimes most of us earn more money as well. And so I want to encourage you to think about, like, how can you use some of that discretionary income that you have to create more time so that you have more energy, so that you can do the things you truly enjoy doing. And so that is kind of like my answer to that now. And as we're going to go through today's episode, I'm hoping to convince more people here that, hey, it is worth to spend an extra, say, $200 a month on personal outsourcing to do the things you want to do.
Bobby in the the recording chat posted a link, which we will include the show notes, called the 4,000 weeks chart, 4K weeks. It's 4kweeks.com, where you can actually see how much of your life you have left. And I thought that was a really interesting concept. It really hits home what you're talking about. Once you realize, not to get too morbid, but carrying on what you were saying, once you realize like how limited time we really have in our life, it really makes you want to really focus the time that you do have, because you realize like every day you have is precious. So I better do what I can to make the most of it.
Yeah. So we have like 3 ways to help you successfully outsource. And so if you're brand new to this, we got something for you. If you're intermediate, you've been kind of doing it, we got something for you as well. If you're advanced, we got some tips and strategies for you here as well. And so the first tip for successfully outsourcing is to make a task list. And it starts by simply thinking about all the things you do on a regular basis, both in your personal life and at work. So it could be anything from like taking the trash out, going to the post office, dropping off packages, grocery shopping, creating a certain report at work, picking up lunch, picking up coffee. Like, what are all the things you do on a regular basis? And just sit down for maybe 10, 15 minutes and start writing down whatever comes to mind. And you'll, over time, create a really long list. And anytime you think about something, add it to the list, okay? Add it to the list. And what you want to do once you have your list is to star anything that you don't enjoy doing. Okay, so once you have your list, star anything that you don't enjoy doing. And guess what? This is your starting point. This is your list that you can then start using to start outsourcing. And when we talk about outsourcing, you might be sometimes thinking or asking the question like, hey, Tan, what's the difference between like personal outsourcing and delegating? Isn't that the same thing? Well, in this episode, and strictly in the context of this episode that we're talking about today, when we think about delegating, it's usually getting someone else in your team or your organization or family to do something for you, right? Whereas personal outsourcing is having someone outside of your team or organization take it over from you, with the sole purpose really to make sure that it frees up your time and energy to do so. So really for your benefit. It has a very like benefit-driven activity associated with it that is not part of your team. That's when we think about personal outsourcing, right? So examples of that would be like getting a housekeeper or a house cleaner, getting a personal assistant or an executive assistant for your personal life. Those are some of the things that are possible. And so once you have your list, right, you can now start marking down all the things you don't enjoy doing, which I think are the best things to start outsourcing. Because once you start to realize all the things you don't enjoy doing and having someone else do it for you, maybe you've already seen this where, you start moving in together with your partner and all of a sudden your partner starts doing things that you don't enjoy doing. You go, oh my gosh, I'm so glad you're doing the cooking because I don't enjoy cooking whatsoever. So I'm glad you're doing that. So since you're doing that, I'm happy to do the other things that I enjoy doing. Maybe you enjoy, keeping the house clean or something, right? And now you have like this little teamwork going on. Brooks, I'm kind of curious to hear, when you first started living together with your wife, did you have that kind of dynamic where like she started doing things you didn't enjoy doing and then you did things that she didn't enjoy doing? Like, how did that go?
Yeah, well, it's kind of funny. So when I was going to propose to my wife, we didn't live together before we were married. So when I was going to propose to my wife, I did what you thought. I don't even know if people do this anymore, but back then I did what I thought you were supposed to do, which is go ask the parents, hey, are you down with this, et cetera, et cetera. And her mom said, my wife's mother said, yeah, but just so you know, of course, no problem. But just so you know, she doesn't clean. So that was my mother-in-law's warning to me, which, it turned out to be not so true. We both do cleaning, but that set up the expectation that once we started living together, we both shared the chores as much as possible. It just so happens she really likes to exactly what you said. It just so happens she really likes cooking. So she has always done the bulk of the cooking. However, I've always done the bulk of she doesn't want to be out there raking leaves and all that stuff. And she doesn't really into like figuring out bills and the finance. And it's just not what she chooses to do. So we've kind of worked it out that way. But we were fine doing everything ourselves at the beginning. We were a young couple. But it was actually once we had our first child, once my baby was born, then we realized, oh man, now is the time we need to figure something out. Because I was working in Canada. We have a year maternity leave, so she was off for a year, which was great. But we knew she would go back to work eventually. So we knew, between trying to balance having a new baby and all the time, energy, and attention problems that causes, and me working and us wanting to spend weekends together with our son, not spend weekends, scrubbing the tub or something like that. That's when we made our first outsourcing decision, which was get a house cleaner. I think that's probably where most people start, I would say.
Yeah. So I think the idea here that I want to make sure I communicate to everyone is you probably outsource in your daily life already. And so this is not like a crazy stretch of imagination, right? It starts with just maybe delegating internally, like maybe you do this with your partner or with your team. But now with personal outsourcing, you kind of like go beyond that a little bit and bring someone from the outside team, if you may call it so, and help you out, and you pay them something to make sure that they get stuff done so that you have more time, energy, and attention to do things you want to do, right? And so the list that we have here in front of you with the things that are marked with a star is, I think, a great place to start. But as you start going further and further, you might find it more challenging to find the things you want to start delegating, because oftentimes the biggest opportunities are sometimes the things that you particularly enjoy doing but take up a lot of time. And those are sometimes like the hardest things to delegate. Now, personally, I have no problem with that, because I know Brooks was being kind by saying that I was very strategic, but I am actually very, very lazy as well. But I just masqueraded as very strategic.
I was trying to throw you a rope there, Tan, but
I'm very lazy. I'm happy to admit that, but I'm happy to also provide a job for someone else, right? That's another way to look at it as well. So there's a lot of ways I can justify it. But if you're someone who's like, okay, I have the basic of outsourcing, going on, like I have someone else kind of doing things that I don't particularly enjoy doing. What are some other things I could be outsourcing? So some of the questions I would suggest to you as prompts is, one, is doing this myself going to keep me from making money? Okay, so anytime you look at a task, ask yourself that question: is doing this myself going to keep me from making money? So a really simple example is a guy that I know, a really successful guy. He runs a really successful advertising agency, and when he puts in the work, he could easily make like $5,000 a day, like that kind of crazy money, right? But every now and then he would like mow his own lawn, which would take him like 3 to 4 hours, and then it's not just the time, but after that, he would just be really tired, to do any other work. So he would just like call it a day, spend time doing other things. And, that was kind of like, in a way, kind of like a day that was wasted, because he could easily pay someone, let's just say $150. And that's being, very generous, right? But let's just keep it realistic. Pay someone, let's just say $25 an hour. Let's say that person works like 3 to 4 hours. Like, okay, maybe $100 to, mow the lawn or whatever. Okay, that person maybe invested $100, but if that person then also spent time working, he could have made an extra $5,000 that particular day. Now, monetarily, that makes a lot of sense, right? Like investing $100 to make $5,000. Like I would do that all day, every day. Right? Like sign me up. Like I'm willing to invest $10,000 if I can make, X amount of return. Right? Now it doesn't always work that way. But if you're someone who's in that kind of position, that's something you really want to ask yourself is doing this myself going to keep me from making money? If the answer is yes, consider, having someone else help you out there.
Yeah. Another thing is, even if it's not like a direct financial impact, a kind of similar question you could ask yourself is doing this myself going to take energy that I could better use for other things? So even if it's not a financial thing, maybe it's like kind of going back to my example that I had before, which is, we could have spent our weekends cleaning the house and evenings as well. My wife and I could have done that, but we would rather have that time to take our son to the park or do all the stuff you want to do with your family. Or even if we didn't have kids, looking back on it now, I wish we had started the outsourcing thing earlier, because we could have gone skiing more and all that sort of stuff. There's lots of things looking back on the early years of our relationship and having a house and stuff like that. There's so much stuff that I did, or that we did both, that I'm just like, why did I spend all my time doing that? We didn't have much money then. We were new parents, early in our careers and stuff like that. But looking back on it now, there's way more outsourcing opportunities we could have had.
So another question you can ask yourself is doing this myself going to take energy I could better use for other things, especially for those things that really frustrate you or just drain you of energy, right? So going back to the other example earlier, the guy who was mowing his own lawn, like he didn't particularly enjoy doing it, but because he had a big yard and everything, like he had to do it every now and then. But like I said, he was like dead tired after doing all of that, right? And he had no energy to do anything else. And so by freeing that particular task, not only did it free up time, but also it freed up energy for him as well. So he could focus doing other things that, brought him energy and actually brought him some sort of happiness as well. So it's not just about financial impact, but also about your personal energy as well, right? So for example, I personally don't like putting furniture together. And so I know that, if I do that, I get really frustrated, drains me of so much energy and focus that I would rather do it, when worst comes to shove, like that's the only final option, like the last option on earth. But I could also bring someone else in and pay him, $20 an hour, and he could do it in 2 hours and have it done for $40. Whereas if I did it myself, I would probably spend 4 to 6 hours frustrated, drained of energy, and not wanting to do anything else that day. And imagine then going out, being social, and not being in the right mood, right? Like that was not worth $40 to me, okay? Having that kind of experience. So it's not just about money, but also about energy. And another question you can ask yourself is this a task where I'm either terrible or slightly competent? Okay. And so the idea is, again, I can put furniture together, but am I good at this? No. Am I terrible at this? Yes. Okay. I should not be doing this. I should have someone else do this. Right. And so I remember a few weeks ago, I purchased this day bed that I put here outside on the patio. And this person put it together for me for $20 an hour that I found on Taskrabbit. And he got it done in about 3 hours. And this guy is super experienced, right? He has put so many furniture together, has done a lot of gigs, has great ratings, and it took him 3.5 hours to do this. And I remember we were recording a podcast at the time, you and I, Brooks, and I was looking through my window and I could see him like put the patio furniture together, right? And so I got a podcast episode done, which is great for all of you guys and for myself, right? I got some financial analysis done, and it took him 3 hours. And that is someone who's a pro, who's an experienced guy to do this. Imagine if I did that, right? And I'd be like not only terrible at it and very incompetent, but I'd also be frustrated, challenged in not a good way. And I would just be drained by the end of this and just not look forward to it. It would probably be a task that I would procrastinate. So those are some of the questions you want to ask yourself.
Yeah, Janira in the live chat says, when I deal with my lawn, it's at least an hour of annoyance. For my lawn care people, it takes like 15 minutes and my yard always looks awesome. And yeah, that's a perfect example. It's not that we can't do this stuff. It's just that, oh man, just for sometimes a surprisingly small amount of money, it can just have such a big benefit for us in our time, energy, and attention.
Yep. So again, tip number 1, make a task list, right? Start by thinking about all the things you do on a regular basis, create that list and start marking things down that you don't particularly enjoy doing, and use that as a starting point to start outsourcing. Okay. That is the first tip. So let's move on to tip number 2 here. And that is determine which type of personal outsourcing you want to do. Is it going to be onshore or offshore? And what we mean with that is onshore simply means having people in your local area or city who you can outsource to. Okay, so these are people that you can kind of meet in person and hire and have them help you out. Whereas offshore, as the name kind of like implies, or the term implies, is someone who could be further away, could be outside of your city. Doesn't necessarily mean it's outside the country. It could be someone who's just not in your local city that you can communicate remotely with. So to give an example, my executive assistant, Jury, she is offshore. She lives half the time in Seattle, where she's from, and then half the time in Mexico, where she enjoys like being semi-retired. Okay, that's something that she likes to do as part of her lifestyle. And so we only communicate online. So technically she's offshore. And recently I had someone that I hired that is now quote unquote onshore, that I do that I have like as a personal assistant. So this is someone that comes here on a regular basis, does like maintenance work here at my place and runs errands for me and that kind of stuff. And then I have other people as well, like a house cleaner that kind of comes in and does all the deep cleaning and stuff. I have that same guy who puts like furniture together. He comes in once a month for the hour and just like will ask me, even if I don't have a task, I'll figure out for him things to figure out. Like there's always something that needs to be fixed, or something like that's a little crooked that needs to be switched out or whatever. Then I have him come in and do that stuff for me. And so those are people that are onshore. And so when you look at your task list, think about all the things that you don't want to do, right? And then think about, okay, is this someone that has to be onshore, or is this something that could be done offshore? And oftentimes what you find is that people who can be offshore can be sometimes a little bit more affordable, but also you can manage your time more effectively, because then you can do everything online, versus onshore, you have to be usually in person. You have to do some sort of training sometimes, let them in, right? That kind of stuff. So you have to coordinate your schedule a little bit more. Whereas with offshore, you kind of like have a meeting and have that other person kind of run with it. So those are some of the things you want to consider as well.
Yeah, offshore sometimes can be helpful too, just the way the time zones work out. If you get that rhythm right, you can have situations where you maybe have a task that needs to be done. You assign it during your workday, and then you wrap up and go to bed. And then during their workday, they're working on it. And then when you start the next day, you walk in and it's ready, or at least is ready for your feedback and stuff like that. So you can work in. It's almost like having extra time in your day, because they're able to actually have forward momentum while you're not working. As far as resources for finding people like this, lots of places you can go. Of course, number one is personal recommendations. So if you know somebody who has a great graphic designer or a great house cleaner, that's how we found our house cleaner in the first place many, many years ago, is through one of my wife's coworkers. She did work for them. So you can ask for people in the different who have experience with people. Craigslist can work out really well too for some types of jobs. You mentioned Taskrabbit. I used Taskrabbit for the first time putting together a big IKEA bookshelf, which is something I could have done myself. And my wife and I have put together 1 million IKEA pieces of furniture, including, like, sometimes you open up a box of IKEA and the instruction manual come out and it's like multiple books. And when you see that, you're in big trouble. You're like, oh, here we go. So, we have a lot of experience with that. But I decided to take your advice and try it with Taskrabbit. And yeah, like you said, it was super amazing. He just came down here to my office. He worked away putting it together while I was in my kitchen working on stuff for our sprint. And it just worked out great. Upwork is another service that we've used a lot to find offshore people, so people doing online tasks. And then Fiverr is something, disclosure, Fiverr has sponsored the podcast in the past. I don't think they're sponsoring this episode, but we've used them successfully as well. In fact, just recently we had a t-shirt we wanted to have designed, and yeah, we could have, I couldn't have designed it because I have no design skill, but we have members of the team who are pretty good design skills, but their time would have been better served doing other things. So we went to Fiverr, created the job. I think I did it on a Friday, and then walked in on Monday, and the t-shirt design was ready for feedback. So it was great. It was a perfect example of time arbitrage and just freeing up our time to do other things.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of TaskRabbit because if you're based in the US, that is probably my number one preferred destination for people that I want to have like locally here. So I have like, if I think about sort of my personal outsourcing team, I have my executive assistant that is quote unquote offshore. And sometimes the word offshore has like a negative connotation, but I don't think of it that way at all, because it could be like anybody remote. Like that's another word we could use for it as well. Like anybody that is remote, right? It doesn't have to be like in Asia or in Europe or in Australia. It could be anybody remote based, depending where they are is just what that is, right? It doesn't really matter, honestly. As long as they're remote, that's good enough for me, right? So whether my executive assistant jury is in Seattle or traveling, in New Mexico, or she is in Mexico now, like it makes no difference in terms of our communication, right? Because we have the meeting with them and she knows like when to be there. And so that makes it really easy. Now, if you need someone local, I have like an executive assistant that I use remote, but then locally I found someone through Facebook, and that I like your strategy there too, Brooks, which is basically asking for a referral. So I basically post on my personal Facebook account, hey, do you have a personal assistant that needs more hours, because I'm looking for one that maybe comes in like 4 to 6 hours a week. And I got a ton of reactions, tons of people reaching out saying, hey, like my personal assistant's looking for someone, or I know someone who's a personal assistant that will reach out to you, and so on. And so having referrals, I think, is always a great resource. So you probably have someone in your network that you can ask. And so even if you're looking for a housekeeper, just post it on Facebook. Someone will probably have someone that they know or that they really love and endorse that you can then use, right? So it saves you a lot of time. And this is how we, back in the old days before we had the internet, this is how we would do things too, right? We would ask our friends and family, like, hey, do you know a car mechanic like that you trust and that is good and that is affordable, right? And we just take it now online to Facebook or whatever social network that you like to use, right? So another resource that I personally really like is care.com. So care.com, care.com. This is more geared towards like nannies, babysitting, housekeepers, elderly care. But you find a lot of great people there for like basic personal assistant work. So Taskrabbit is a little bit more expensive because they take a bigger commission. Care.com does a lot of vetting as well, but you find people that you then pay directly, if that makes sense, because Taskrabbit does a payment system online. So you pay through Taskrabbit and then they pay, the contractor basically. Whereas care.com, you find a person and then you work with that person directly and then pay them directly. So it's more of a marketplace in that sense. There's a little bit more vetted. So big fans of both. Like you mentioned, Upwork, which I think is great for remote work. So you can find an executive assistant on there if you need any design work done, any sort of research. One of my favorite things to delegate or to outsource remotely is complex research. So one of the quote unquote hacks is you can find MBA graduates on Upwork to do research for you, and then give you like almost like in a presentation format the research that you want. So to give an example, I was interested a few years ago when we were creating the course for Escape Your Email. I wanted to know what were the trends around email, right? In terms of like statistics, how many people are using email, like how much time are we spending on email, like how much does it cost in terms of corporate, yada, 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 right? And those are all statistics we use. Part of it was like in education, in our courses, in our marketing, and so on. And I had like a Harvard MBA do this research for me for like, I want to say $22 an hour or something. It was like something ridiculous. I was just like, okay, I can have this like super smart person, way smarter than me, for $22 an hour, do research for me. It cost me about maybe 5 or 6 hours, and have all this presentation done for me, and in a beautiful slide deck. And I was like, okay, perfect. I could use this for our webinar or for our training or courses and so on, and even our podcast content, and bring it up. And could I have done it myself? Yes, totally. I could have done it myself as well. But having someone who is, pretty intelligent for relatively low dollar amounts do that kind of work for me was so worth it. And that made me realize, oh, what are some other things we can do to delegate and research and outsource as well? And so those are some of the things that I want you to start considering as well. And so as we're talking about, your task list, think about all the research you have to do, all the things you don't enjoy doing, any sort of design or creative work, like anything that you're not good at, right? Hopefully that list becomes longer and longer and longer, so that you can then make it easier for yourself to delegate or in this case, start outsourcing. Because a lot of times, Brooks, and I'm sure you found this too, we are a little bit concerned about, oh, do I have enough work to give someone, or do I have enough hours to give to people? And that's why creating that task list, which is tip number one, is so important, right? You want to kind of like do the heavy lifting first by thinking about it. And then once you kind of have an idea, you start to realize, oh, actually, I have way more work than I thought I had. And that's when you start to see opportunity, and where you go, oh, wow, I could actually win back like 4 or 5 hours, not only a month, but 4 or 5 hours a week sometimes.
All right. So I would be remiss not to ask you this question, since you are somebody who definitely has had a lot of experience with outsourcing. So you've made your task list, you've figured out what you want to outsource, and maybe even figure out who you're going to outsource it to. Now, how do you make it successful? Like, what are some landmines you should avoid? What are some kind of like best practices for making sure that people do it the right way and don't waste a lot of time and money, which can happen when outsourcing, to be fair. So how do you avoid all that? How do we avoid making any mistakes that you might have made over the years?
Yeah, so that is actually tip number 3, and that is to set the right expectation. So if you are starting to work with someone, the most important thing is to, one, communicate a vision and set expectations right out the gate. Because there's this window of opportunity when you first start working with someone, that they're really receptive and that they're closely listening to every single detail. Okay, it's just the natural part of a working relationship. Like when someone first shows up for their job, like they're most receptive, and you can set expectations, a vision for them, and they know exactly then how to operate and what to do moving forward without much communication, right? And so when my personal assistant first started working with me, I created a vision for her, and I said, okay, Natasha, here's the vision for this particular role. Okay. And I gave her some context. I said, hey, I'm the founder of Asian Efficiency. We teach people how to be more productive at work and in life. And as the business is growing, it's taking up more of my time. But the reality is I also have all these other things that need to be done that are just as important, but just won't get done if I am focused on my business and growing my business, right? So whatever you and I are working on together, all the things we're going to be doing is really important, right? So for example, doing my laundry, watering my plants, like these are all things that are really important to me, but just in the prioritization of my to-do list of all things that need to be done, it's just on the lower side of my priority list, but just as important, because if it doesn't get done, I have dead plants, right? If my laundry doesn't get done, I look smelly, I look terrible, like that's not good either, right? Like all these things are important. And so what you're doing is really important. And so as I was communicating that vision to her, I wanted to make sure she understood that whatever she was doing was making a big difference in my life, right? And the whole sole purpose was to free up time, free up resources, and that she was going to make a big difference in my life. And as a result, all this impact that I can make through Asian Efficiency and all of our clients and stuff. And so all these things otherwise wouldn't get done without her, right? And so then I started setting expectations. Like, one of the expectations I set for her was to over communicate. It's really important with me that you over communicate, not under communicate or just communicate, that you over communicate. Because if you set that expectation right out the gate, they're going to ask you more questions in the beginning, right? They're going to tell you like if they're running late or whatever. And then over time, you can slowly like taper it down to like have it to a communication level that you're comfortable with and that is useful to you, right? Whereas the opposite, what I found is if you under communicate in the beginning and try to have someone over communicate over time, it's actually a lot harder. And so and communication skills are just really important. Being reliable is another important trait and really important expectation, right? And it kind of sounds obvious, but I think it's always important to state the obvious as well. And then the other one would be to get stuff done without excuses. Like if I delegate something and outsource something and that person knows how important it is and how busy my life is, like just get it done without any excuses. Just figure out a way to be resourceful, get it done. And if you really run into a roadblock, then come to me and we'll figure out a different solution. But your role is to make sure that it gets done without much intervention. And so once you kind of set those, expectations right out the gate, you allow them to then make decisions, right? And do the things that they're good at and that they thrive in. And then it creates more free time for me and for yourself as well if you set those expectations. And so a lot of mistakes, a lot of like mishaps, get avoided. And then if you do have an expectation and they didn't meet it, if you never talked about it, you get disappointed very quickly. So we want to make sure we get that out right out the gate.
What you said about stating the obvious is so true. This is something like you hear a lot with people who have a house cleaner, let's say, and they'll say, my house cleaner was here for an hour and a half and there's still cobwebs above the kitchen cabinets or something like that. And what I always think is, do you actually explicitly say that that's a place you want it cleaned? It might be obvious to you, but to them, they might be just focusing on the things that are visible to everyone. So if you want something out of your outsourcing relationship, if you have something that even if it's obvious to you, do your best to try to verbalize that and explicitly say, hey, I want it to make sure it's cleaned above the kitchen cabinets. And sometimes it's a process. Sometimes you'll start a project, it'll go a certain way, you give feedback and it'll change. So just make sure, like you said, over communicate, give that feedback in a respectful way, obviously, but don't be afraid to give specific feedback. This is actually a mistake I made with that t-shirt example I said earlier. So like I said, submitted the job on Friday, came in on Monday, the t-shirt was ready. It was perfect. They did an amazing job on it. The only problem was the color wasn't quite right. We wanted it was red and we wanted it more AE orange, which I kind of thought would be obvious from the samples I provided. However, it's not their fault, it's my fault. I didn't specifically say, hey, we want it to be this color orange. And, it was a very easy tweak for them to make it. I just gave it back and it was back that same night. So it was no problem. But that was a perfect example. If I had just been way more clear when I first submitted it, it would have saved him some time and it would have saved us some time as well. So the more clear you are upfront and stating the obvious, the better results you're going to have.
Yeah. So think about all the things that the other person might need to do their job successfully, right? So maybe they need passwords or something to log in somewhere, or access to certain tools, or they need to know what the budget is, or if they have to pay for cash for something, that they have the cash, or what kind of approvals that they need from you, right? These are all the things that you want to think about before you start outsourcing some of the more complex tasks as well. And so if you set that expectation in the beginning as well, then it's really easy for them to bring it up with you before you run into trouble, right? So for example, with my personal assistant, when she first started working for me, I said, hey, I'm going to give you my personal credit card that you can use for all purchases. Under $100, you can just make that purchase without my approval. But anytime it's over $100, I need you to tell me that it's going to cost over $100, okay? Before you make that purchase. And so now she knows, like, okay, anytime she's running around and she's like using my card, she knows, like, okay, if it's under $100, I don't have to ask Tan if this is, good enough. She can just purchase it, right? Whereas if it's over $100, she'll have to text me or call me first before I, say yes or no, before she can then make that final decision to make that purchase. And so, like, that's a simple guideline that I set right out the gate, right? So there's a couple other things, like, access to your place, maybe certain times of the day that they can communicate with you. Maybe you want that person not to, contact you after certain hours or something. Like, these are all the things you want to think about right out the gate. And so it takes a little bit more, thinking up front, but if you invest like maybe an hour thinking about this, it's going to save you so much time down the line and friction that it's worth kind of like doing that now. So hopefully this episode here and this content that we're talking about here is going to help you with that. And so a different way to think about this is, like, imagine being in her or his position and think about, like, what are all the things this person needs or that I need to get this task done, Okay. And if you can kind of imagine yourself in that position, you can then say, okay, I might need money or resources or approval. Okay, let's make sure I then write that down and communicate it to that person as well. Right. So those are some of the things you want to consider. And if you want to dive deeper into that, we have a whole course on delegating and delegation inside the dojo. So if you're a dojo member, you should definitely go check that out. But if you want some more examples, we have some episodes on executive assistants like TPS 143 and TPS 190 as well that will kind of like talk you through some of the expectations we just talked about, how to set them, some additional tasks that you can delegate and outsource. Because I know we can talk about this topic forever, and maybe we'll create an even separate course on this, but this is just the tip of the iceberg. And so again, for me in my personal life, I've been able to win back probably at least like 5 to 7 hours a week by just having all these people helping me out with both my executive assistants and my personal assistant. And surprisingly, it doesn't cost that much money. Okay. You can get started with a housekeeper. You can get started with someone just cleaning your place for, say, $25, $30 an hour. And those 3-4 hours will be some of the best money you will spend. And just start there and just get a taste of what it's like, right, to win back those hours. And then you go, okay, I'm a believer now. Like, what else can I outsource? And then use that list that we just referenced earlier. Anything else, Brooks, you want to bring up before we wrap things up here?
No, but I'm glad you called out those two executive assistant episodes, because Alice in the live stream says that we should mention them. And she says those were life-changing episodes for her. So this stuff can, I mean, it sounds like a lot, but this stuff, once you get in the habit of outsourcing and you get the, it takes a few things here and there, but once you get on it, it really can be life-changing for your work life and your personal life, freeing up this time, energy, and attention.
Absolutely. So just to wrap things up here, we always want to make things simple and actionable. That's what we're known at Asian Efficiency. And so to make this podcast episode actionable for you, think about the things you do on a weekly basis. Okay. Think about all the things you do every single week and create a list of things that you are doing. And then mark that list with an asterisk with all the things you don't particularly enjoy doing. Okay, so now you have a long list of tasks, and those are marked. Some of them are marked with an asterisk that you don't particularly enjoy doing. And that would be a great starting point for you to start thinking about, like, how can I outsource this? How can I give this to someone else to win back time, energy, and attention? Okay, and if you want some more hand-holding and some training from us on this particular topic, like I mentioned at the very beginning of this episode, we have a live workshop on this coming up on January 12th, 2021. Okay, it's the monthly Do the Damn Thing. So if you're a Dojo member, you can always subscribe to that already. But if you're not a member yet and you want to join this particular session, go to theproductivityshow.com/implement. Again, that URL is theproductivityshow.com/implements. And we're going to walk you through how to start outsourcing things in your personal life, give you some more concrete examples that we've done in our personal life, and make sure that by the end of the hour, you have something outsourced already. Okay, so I'm super excited for that training. And if you want to reference everything that we talked about in the show notes, you can go to theproductivityshow.com/333.